The sun shines only on my house. Written by HybridPumpkin. As I bumped it with my elbow, the cheap box of Chinese takeout toppled over, sending a cascade of soy sauce-soaked pieces of broccoli onto my cluttered desk. An exasperated groan escaped my lips, echoing through the halls of my empty home, as I listened to the sound of my voice resonating through the bleak hallways. It truly stung how lonesome my life was. I boasted no wife, children, parents, siblings, or even friends. I had nothing in this cruel world, save for the inheritance left behind by my late father. As I stared sadly at the mess my carpet was, I snapped out of my trance and stood up from my desk. Without delay, I stolidly exited the room. Walking past the nice furniture that filled each room almost made me sad. So many nice places to sit, but nobody to sit there. So many nice places to lay, but nobody to lay there. Before the accident, I'd at least had Martha, but now I was alone. I pulled a dish towel out from the cavernous depths beneath the sink. I flicked on the faucet and began to wet it, making sure it was good and damp before I went back to my bedroom. As I walked back in, I stared at the boxes of Chinese takeout that littered my desk. I was sick of all the fine, fancy foods I normally ate and wanted a taste of average food for a change. I dabbed at the messy floor, trying to get up the soy sauce before my carpet was completely ruined. I stood hunched over my rug for more than half an hour, cleaning up the floor. I had nothing better to do. My life was empty, with no other people around me, and nothing I truly loved. I held back bitter tears as I stood up and threw the rest of the food in the trash. I wasn't hungry. In fact, at this point, it felt like I would never die. I would never be hungry or thirsty. I would simply live on in this cold, lonely world. As I drew the curtains to my second-story bedroom, I noticed that the sun was still up. I didn't bother to check the time, just figured I would go to bed early. I had no reason not to. As I climbed into bed, however, I heard something odd. I heard shouting coming from outside my house. I forced myself out of bed and threw open my curtains. As I did, I saw a teenager stumbling around in his yard, right next to the property line. He spun around in circles, as if he were dancing. I noticed a few bottles scattered around the ground, and realized that it was another underage drinker. A few of his friends cheered him along, clapping along with the rhythm of his drunken dance. It seemed strange to me that a group of drunken teenagers would get together in broad daylight. I was getting ready to go outside and tell them to go home, when I saw the teenager stumble again. When he did, he drew a lot closer to my yard. The clapping continued, this time faster, as the dancer's comrades encouraged him to speed up his wild routine. He again stumbled, this time over a toy car left in the grass. Every time he stumbled, he grew closer to my property. I decided that as soon as he got on my lawn, I would call the cops. The clapping got faster, much faster. The boy was struggling to keep time with them, tripping and stumbling left and right. Finally, it happened. The teenager stepped back, his foot hit a tree root, and he fell over. He cried out in dismay as he collapsed, on his back, in my yard. I was about to grab my phone when I saw his eyes widen. He yelped and covered his eyes. The teenager ran back onto the other property, bawling gibberish to his friends about the light and the shining sun. I decided that I didn't want to mess with the authorities right now. So I pulled open my window and leaned out of it. The underage drinkers soon saw me and pointed up at me. Tears shone in their faces. "Listen, if you don't get your sorry hides off my lawn, I'm gonna call the cops," I roared. "Take your shenanigans elsewhere." The faces of the drinkers turned to absolute horror as they stumbled away, their shouts echoing through the night as they put as much distance as they could between themselves and my house. Drawing the curtains, I spun around, ready to get back in bed. The sun still showed no signs of going down, but I didn't care. I was tired and in dire need of sleep. As I sat down, I caught a glimpse of my clock. My eyes were half closed, and I barely had time to read it before I pulled the covers over my face. But the time on the clock didn't seem quite right. 10:30 p.m. I figured it wasn't set right, or maybe I had read it wrong. Whatever the case, I didn't care. I slowly drifted off as the rhythmic ticking of the clock lulled me to sleep. "What in tarnation?" I cried as I stepped out of my yard and onto my neighbor's sidewalk. It was dark, pitch black. All around me, it was night. No people roaming the streets. No cars passed by. The only thing that could be heard was the sound of chirping crickets. I stepped back into my yard. Mostly everything was the same. The crickets, the lack of people. The only thing that was different was the light. The sun beamed down upon my property, brighter than I'd ever seen it. All around me, the world was bright and sunny. But when I stepped off, the illusion was broken. Darkness covered the world. I ran back to my lawn. Light. I kept running into my other neighbor's yard. Again, darkness. This wasn't right. The sun can't just shine on one house. If it illuminates one person's property, then it will do so for his neighbors. I struggled to comprehend the thought that the sun could only shine on my house. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe I was dreaming. Nothing made sense. I ran back into my house and slammed the door shut, realizing that I wanted nothing to do with any of this. There had to be some explanation for what was going on. The clock read 2 p.m. The sun was still shining bright as ever. I sat in my living room, trying to read a book, but I was distracted. I hadn't been able to focus on anything since I discovered the anomaly that was my house. I figured everywhere else had to have had light now, given the time, but I still felt uncomfortable. Would there never be darkness? If I wanted a comfortable sleep, would I have to go to a hotel every night? The lack of proper night was disturbing. I used to be afraid of the dark, but now I missed it. My wild thoughts were interrupted after I heard a knock at the door. I walked over to it. Maybe the visitor would have some answers, or maybe I would at least have some company. Instead, all that I found was a single letter with no return address. It was scarlet red and had a strange looking seal on it. The seal looked like an ornate sun overlooking an assortment of trees. I brought it back inside and slammed the front door closed. Inside the letter, I was greeted with a page of beautiful stationery, with only one word imprinted upon it in the center. Found. Thoughts began to race through my head once again. Everything that was going on was so strange, so unnatural. Who had sent me the letter, and why? What was found supposed to mean? Was somebody following me? Nothing made any sense. The sun, the letter, and I was confused. I never asked for any of this. I never did anything to anyone. Why were these things happening? I pulled open the curtains and was greeted with a horrible surprise. The sky was red, blood red. Clouds of a disgusting yellow color filled it as well, casting strange shadows across the ground. All around me, the world was empty. No people walking, no cars rode past, no crickets chirped. No life seemed to exist in this universe. I ran out of my house and onto my yard. Was this happening to others as well? I stepped into my neighbor's yard. The sky was the same, but darker. The sun didn't shine, and the shadows were even more horrifying, shaped like beasts and other creatures. But that wasn't the worst of it. All around me, people stood. Not normal people. Shadows. Shadows like dark impressions of real humans. They crowded around throughout the area. Clumps of them were scattered around the area, with little space between them. I jumped back onto my own property. The people disappeared. The shadows that littered the ground did as well. There was nothing except me and my house. Terrified, I ran back into my house. Was this a national disaster? I flicked on the radio and turned it to the news station.
It's another beautiful day, isn't it? The sky has no clouds in it and the weather is perfect. It's a great day to go to the park or on a walk.
I raced back to the window. What was going on? The weather channel said that everything was normal. I threw open the curtains. The sky was still blood red. The clouds still filled it. It was a terrifying sight. Then I saw something. Something in the sky. A pattern formed with a darker red. It was barely noticeable, but I still saw them. They were eyes.